Hello everyone and welcome to a really wild game from round 1 of the Tata Steel Chess Tournament 2021. It's Magnus Carlsen versus Alireza Firouzja, as we often like to refer to this matchup, the battle for the future. And like I said, it's a really crazy one, and it's very interesting to see how players will perform in classical chess after so many online events. So without further ado, let's check it out. As like I said, it's really a wonderful game. So Magnus with the white pieces opens with d4. We have knight to f6 by Alireza, c4, e6, knight to f3, and weak transpose into the queen's gambit decline. We have d5, knight to c3, and now knight b to d7. Here there are a lot of options for black. There are a lot of very popular moves. Bishop to e7 is and c6 are the most played moves, and knight b to d7 is like the fourth most common played move. So Alireza not really going for the absolute main line, but still, of course, Magnus knows all of these continuations. So here, bishop to g5 and h6 now. Again, c6 is what's mostly played here. h6 is somewhat rare. So h6, first kicking back the bishop to h4, and only now bishop to e7. So continuing development, preparing to castle, and now Magnus could also just continue developing e3, develop the bishop, and so on. But Magnus pretty much always is something that I figured out when the queen's gambit decline is on the board. Magnus always captures, c captures on d5. So knight captures, and now we have a trade here. Captures, and now e4. So Magnus grabs the center, and now Alireza can either move the knight back or capture on c3. So knight captures on c3, b captures. Yes, this does improve Carlsen's center, but it's still all very known theory, and Alireza is prepared for this. We have castles and bishop to d3. Magnus is also ready to castle now, and now there is a game in the database where b6 was played, but the move Alireza plays is c5, and it is already, as of move 11, that we have a completely new game. So let's see what happens here. Magnus castles, and now Alireza trades once on d4. We have captures, Magnus recaptures, and now b6. So Magnus still has his very nice center here, controls a lot of squares here. And Alireza is preparing bishop to b7 to get his bishop to this beautiful diagonal and bring the rooks into the game, depending on how Magnus plays. And here, as Alireza, by playing b6, gave Magnus a target, Magnus goes a4. He wants to play a5 and trade off his a pawn for black's b pawn. Bishop to b7, and Magnus immediately advances it. We have a5, and now b captures on a5. If you don't capture on a5, then it's just a very weird tension going on here, where you want to capture on b6 when black moves this knight from here, but black wants to be able to move the knight, so black doesn't want to keep this tension there. And if you move the knight, then captures, black will have to recapture with the a pawn, and then black loses his passed a pawn. It's always nice to have your passed pawn on the edge of the board. So here, b captures on a5, rook captures on a5, and now just knight to f6 with a double attack on the e4 pawn. And Magnus defends this. Rook to e1, and now rook f to d8, putting some pressure on the d file. And here, Magnus defends it yet again with queen to a1. So adds additional support to the d pawn, but also there's now a double attack on the a7 pawn, but not really. As Alireza defends it by playing queen to c7. So defends it indirectly, because now if you go after the pawn, then just captures, and rook to a8. The queen is now under attack, and the only move for Magnus here is to trade queens. And after this is all said and done, captures, these 2 pawns will be easy targets for black, and Alireza will at some point pick them up. For example, rook d8 goes after the bishop, and now if the bishop moves, for example, c2, now a rook just here, and the pawn will be recaptured. But there are plenty of other lines where black also is successful in doing so. So after queen to c7, Magnus doesn't go for the pawn, of course. He goes h3, and now a6. Alireza strengthens the pawn here, and even though it's defended twice and attacked 3 times, it's still not a good time to capture it. For example, if you capture on a6, then you have this problem of rook to d6, and now you cannot capture. There's a triple attack here on the bishop, and what do you do here now? You cannot capture, because then you lose the rook. Well, you lose the exchange basically, but black will be better. So instead, after a6, we have rook to c5 by Magnus, a nice rook lift followed by rook to c5, a very active square for the rook now, and Alireza needs to decide whether to go back with the queen, queen d7, queen e7, or to be active with queen to f4. Alireza always goes for the active move, so queen to f4, and now as the e4 pawn is attacked 3 times by the queen, knight, and bishop, Magnus defends it, rook to e5, and here Alireza says, okay, knight d7, we're attacking, sorry, that's a rook, knight to d7, I'm attacking your rook and you have to move it. The rook is quite passive here, so Magnus needs to figure out something else. Rook back to a5, and Alireza repeats, knight f6. Again, a triple attack here, hoping for a repetition of moves. If the position is repeated 3 times, then of course it will be a draw. Magnus, as he does have the white pieces, and this is only move 22, not interested in a draw here, went into a sort of a deep think, not a too deep of a think, some maybe 10 minutes, and then decided to go for d5. d5 is a very nice breakthrough. g3 was also a very nice option here, but Magnus prefers not to do it. The point of g3 is that you cannot capture the knight. If you capture the knight, rook e3, and the queen is captured. There's no square available for the queen as the rook covers the h5 square. So what you would have to do after g3 is just retreat, for example, queen c7, and then you can strengthen your position with king to g2. But Magnus doesn't like this. Like we said, Magnus, after this repetition of knight to f6, played d5. And this is a straight-out pawn sacrifice to open up lines towards the black king, as you can see. So Alireza captures it. You do not want to allow d captures on e6. Alireza captures, and now, of course, e5. This is a well-known theme. Sacrifice the d pawn to advance the e pawn, and now you've opened up this diagonal. And the knight needs to move now. Knight to e4, and now comes queen to d4. A beautiful centralizing move with the queen, and the knight cannot move now because queen captures queen will happen. So here Alireza goes back, rook d to c8. Now there's nothing on the c file, so Alireza claims it for himself. We have rook to c8, and now there's a question whether you could do something. For example, maybe you could go for this rook captures on d5. Seems like a maybe reasonable idea. For example, captures, captures, and captures. Now your black's knight is attacked 3 times, but after this very unpleasant knight to c3, there's not all that much white can do here. So it really won't be in any compensation for white. So instead, Magnus goes rook back to a1, and this is something he decided, as the rook cannot be any more active along this 5th rank, and you will not be capturing on d5. So Magnus will try to activate it somewhere else. For example, the b file will be a good option. Here, Alireza just starts pushing his pass pawn. Alireza is not convinced Magnus has enough compensation, and he wants to advance now his pass pawn as far as possible. We have rook 8 to b1 by Magnus, and now bishop to c6. And here, again, a very tricky position. Magnus could go for something like rook to b6, put some pressure on this bishop, and it's a very tricky move. For example, if you go for rook 8 to b8, then you get the very unpleasant bishop to a6, and already Magnus is close to winning, because if the rooks are traded, queen captures, and there's now a double attack. This is attacked, and you don't really have a good way of defending. So what you would have to do after rook to b6 is something like bishop to d7, but this is already very, very hard to see. Queen captures on d5, and now you have to move the knight to c5, and it's a pretty crazy position where if Alireza can defend, and he should be able to, will just continue pushing his pass pawn, and it's gonna be fine. So Magnus instead goes for another pawn sacrifice, and he pushes the pawn to e6. Now he opens up the queen's diagonal as well, as he already opened up the one belonging to the light square bishop. And again, you don't want to allow something like pawn captures here, so Alireza captures it, and now knight to e5. So beautiful second pawn sacrifice to activate not only the open lines, but also to get a beautiful central square for this knight. And also there's now some pressure on this bishop here. And here, queen to f6. Problem is, here, by moving the knight, this is actually a very big threat. For example, if Alireza is careless, pushes a4, just f3, and you win the knight. The knight cannot move because the queen hangs, so that's out of the question. So instead, Alireza went back, queen to f6. Now, Magnus always has the option of moving this knight. For example, knight captures here, then you can trade queens. But Magnus is not interested in trading queens. And also the problem is if knight captures on c6, then rook captures on c6 is also an idea. Of course, that's how you're going to do it. Nothing here for Magnus. So Magnus needs to be very careful here, and he decides to go for f3. And this is a very tricky line. He could also just trade everything and just try and play this endgame where he's going to be down a pawn, but not a lot of chances here. For example, d captures on e4, knight captures on c6. Now, of course, not capturing with the queen because the knight recaptures, so just a rook captures, and now we get this position, and it's just a very nice position. Queen captures on e4, and black should be better. Black's gonna play something like rook c to a6, start pushing his passed pawn if he can, and enjoy his extra pawn. But only black can be better here. So instead, after this queen to f6 move, we have f3 by Magnus, still keeping it very interesting. But this is a most adventurous move. Alireza goes back, knight to g5. And now, only now, rook to b6 with a double attack on this this bishop here. And also after the bishop moves, the rook will also be attacking the e6 pawn. So this is how Magnus is planning to do a breakthrough. Now you could do a bishop to d7 because the knight cannot capture, the queen hangs on d4, but Alireza goes all the way, bishop to e8, and it is in fact the better move. And here Magnus goes for queen to e3. He unpins, and now he wants to put move the knight and put a lot of pressure on this e6 pawn. Also very interesting here was f4, but f4 again, Magnus doesn't like his chances because after knight f7 and f5, which is just going all out, you get knight captures, rook captures, and now as there's so many pieces attacking this e6 pawn, rook to c6. And here after a nice trade, Magnus could go for f captures on e6, creating a nice passed pawn here, but the bishop covers this square, the rook covers it, and also Alireza still has this passed a pawn, which is incredibly strong. So Magnus also not liking this. So after bishop to e8, we have queen to e3 by Magnus, and now Magnus, of course, is planning to move the knight and go after this e6 pawn here. And here Alireza should wait one more move before he starts pushing his a4 pawn. He should block this knight. He should play h5, block the knight's access to the g4 square, and only then continue with, well, depending on what Magnus plays. However, Alireza decided to go for a4 right away. He said, okay, this is not a problem, and Magnus immediately played it, knight to g4. And now the problem is, for example, if you go queen to e7, you get h4, and now what are you going to do with the knight? If knight goes all the way back, rook captures on e6, and this is now a great position for white. So Alireza doesn't like this. Alireza goes back all the way, not queen e7, but rather queen to d8, and puts pressure on this rook. So now if the queen moves, the rook will hang. But Magnus just, of course, captures with this rook. So rook captures on e6. And now, well, now the thing is, Alireza can capture this rook with the knight, but maybe it's not the greatest of moves. Maybe you should just continue with a3, as that's what you've been doing for the entire game. But Alireza decides that it is okay to capture the rook, and it indeed is okay to capture the rook. The engine doesn't mind this, but it comes with a very tricky position because Magnus played queen captures on e6 with check, and now Alireza should just play king to h8. The thing is, after king to h8, it's very hard for white to continue this game, but we're gonna get back to this because I might spoil it for you. The thing is, after this queen to e6 check, Alireza played bishop to f7, but now well, now it simply doesn't work, and I'm sure Magnus was incredibly happy when he saw this bishop to f7 move, because now Magnus is completely winning. So feel free to pause the video here and win the game for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, and for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's knight captures on h6 with check. And now you don't really have a good option here because you really can't move. If you go king to f8, then just queen captures on f7 is checkmate, because the knight now also covers that. If you go here, then there's a double attack on the bishop, just knight captures on f7 check, and you're going into a nice discovery. King's gonna go here, knight captures with check, you have to go go back, doesn't matter where you go because the bishop covers the h7 square. Anything you do is checkmate, so just queen to f7 checkmate. So, after this knight captures an h6 move with check, Alireza had to capture the knight, and now Magnus captures it. Queen captures an h6, and now there are a lot of problems here. If you don't react, bishop to h7 is just a mating threat. For example, if, let's say, black makes a silly move like a3, just bishop to h7 check, and you are getting mated. King h8, it's a famous mating pattern. Bishop g6 check, king here, queen h7 check, king here, and queen to f7 is checkmate. So this is one of the first mating patterns that you learn when you start learning mating patterns. So of course Alireza defended against this right away. He played queen to c7, added a defender to the bishop here, but now the game is completely lost for Alireza. So feel free to pause the video once again. It's a forced mate in 6, so while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on mating young Alireza in 6 moves. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's queen to h7 with check. And now there's not much to be done. King f8, we have queen to h8 with check. Bishop, the king cannot reach the e-file, so bishop to g8 is the only move, and now queen to h6 check. And it was in this position on move 40 that Alireza Firouzja resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Of course, we're going to show what happens now. There are 2 options, either king f7 or queen blocks. So if queen blocks, then we just get queen to d6 with check, and now there's nothing you can do. Either you block with the queen and then it's checkmate, or you move the king to f7 and then again queen to e7 is checkmate. The bishop covers the g6 square, so the black king has nowhere to go. And another thing, after queen to h6 check, we said you don't have to block, you can play king to f7, but it's not much better. Just bishop to g6 with check, king f6, and now another great discovery, bishop to h5 with check, king to f5, and now g4 with checkmate. So kind of a nicer one, but we haven't seen any of these, so we don't know which one Magnus would go for, as on queen to h6 check, Alireza resigned the game. And an amazing victory for Magnus Carlsen in round 1 of the Tata Steel Chess Tournament 2021. He said after the previous tournament that he didn't really feel the moves, that he couldn't really get any of the games. He played strong moves, he played incredibly strong moves, but that he couldn't get the attacking games that he wanted. And here he really tried everything. He gave Alireza chances by risking so much, but like you've seen, you had to be extremely precise to defend against this. And I've mentioned that we're gonna go back to this position where Alireza played bishop to f7. The reason king to h8 works for Alireza, but it's incredibly hard to find, is because the following doesn't work now. Knight captures on h6 as it was played in the game, but now it doesn't come with check. So what is the threat? White is threatening just checkmate here because the bishop prevents the queen from defending this square. So the only move here that saves black is bishop to h5. So these are the 2 moves that Alireza had to find in order to properly defend here. Now the queen defends against checkmate, and the bishop covers the f7 square, so there's no knight to f7 check winning the queen. And if queen to f5 going after this checkmate, then you have queen b6 check, king has to move, and then you pick up the knight here. So let's say king h2, you pick up the knight, you defend against mate, you won a piece, black is winning here. But yeah, incredibly hard move to find. After a queen to e6 check, Alireza for some reason immediately blocked with the bishop, and it was just all over. So really crazy stuff. But yeah, amazing start to the tournament for Magnus. Not the greatest of starts for Alireza, but it's how it is, you know. There are still plenty of more rounds, and we'll see what happens. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. The battle for the future continues. I would like to thank Vincent Saborin, Rezvan Abir, Andrea Agostini, Dimitrios Chrysikopoulos, and Mosen Razei for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Tata Steel Chess Tournament, checking up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.